Welcome to Journey Home to Self. This is a place for you to remember who you really are. Here, we find the path to our true self and start living deeply authentic lives that are filled with purpose and meaning. I'm your host, Deepshikha. I'll be your guide, your partner, and a fellow traveler on this adventurous ride. And along with my guests, we bring you conversations, opinions, ideas, wisdom, and resources so you can start your journey home to self. Let's begin. Hello, welcome back. Oof, it's been way too long of a break between seasons. And I'm not gonna lie, I have been incredibly nervous about recording this comeback episode. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we took a season break in April-ish or maybe May. And what I thought would be a couple of months turned out to be a whole season. Like a season and a half, whole summer, and we're in fall in the middle of it now. And I have to say, I was talking to my friend Swapna. She has been slowly and gently nudging me to get back to the podcast. And I told her, I said, I feel so awkward because I said I'll be back and I said I'll also have some mini episodes in between, and I haven't done any of that. And she said the most profound and most helpful thing that anyone has ever said to me. She said, Deepshikha, I don't think anyone cares. And I think she's right. And it really is the reason why I'm back here. It made me feel better. But why am I even addressing this whole awkward absence if I believe that no one cares and if it really helped me start recording the episodes? Because I still feel like I owe an explanation because the reality is I didn't do what I said I will do. And it's an integrity thing for me. Quite honestly, it's a bit annoying because I really do put a lot of pressure on myself to do exactly what I said in the way I said. And if I don't address it, it eats at me. So I have to put it out in the open rather than feel awkward about it. But B, and this is important, this podcast is about Journey Home to Self. And I will not deny that, yes, I procrastinated a lot starting season 2. You know how when you procrastinate a little bit and that little thing becomes bigger and bigger? You can call it fear, confusion, laziness, or we can call it for what it is, procrastination. But what is also true is that this long break enabled me to reach those rich rooms of self like never before. This 5-6 month break that I took, quite literally, made it possible for me to experience the journey home to self, my own journey, at a whole new level. And I do think that I had to reach a point where my higher self had to say, wow, like this feels incredible. Now let's go make some magic with it. Now let's share all that we have learned with others. I'm not going to deny there was a whole lot of fear, a whole lot of procrastination there as well. But I do feel that we have to give onus. We have to give kind of like an honor to our journeys. If we keep thinking about what went wrong, why did I not do that, then the situation seems even more awkward and impossible to reach. But when we become okay with it and we say, okay, this is what it is, and yeah, I've learned some lessons, now what we can do from here, that's when there's a whole new incredible wisdom that comes from it. So here I am with a whole new perspective on Journey Home to Self and what it really means to be on this journey. And I'll say one thing. I've had a lot of beautiful, not so beautiful experiences this past season in the summer. And I will say that I believe in the whole concept of Journey Home to Self more than ever before. I do believe, and some of you who have heard me on this podcast before or who are familiar with the work know that I talk about different stages in the journey home to self. I talk about different initiations. I talk about the water initiation. I talk about the death of the ego. I talk about, self-doubt and how to overcome that. I talk about the air initiation. So there are different stages that we all go through in the journey home to self. And I believe in those stages even more now than I did before. This is the hill that I'm dying on, that we all have to go through these stages. We have to go through the 4 initiations of water, air, fire, and earth in order to gain mastery over ourselves. So here I am with a whole new perspective on Journey Home to Self and what does it really mean to be on this journey. And we have an exciting season lined up for you. I'm in the process of recording some future podcast episodes and really fired up about the guests that we are having and also on the topics. Now, consider this episode as a reminder on why you're listening. Why did you choose to listen to an episode called Journey Home to Self? Maybe you've heard some of these past episodes. Maybe you are on the journey home to self yourself, or maybe this is the first episode you're listening to. Now, let's remember why it's important that we put our feet, we put our hearts, and we put our whole ass on this journey. Those who embark on the self-discovery journey of coming home to self, they often feel that there's a tussle, there's like a war happening within their own being. It's happening in their mind, it's happening in their body, it's happening in their soul. And this tussle is really between their ego and their self. Now, a lot of people get freaked out by the word ego, and they feel like they absolutely need the ego. So sometimes I refer to ego also as the lower self or self with a lowercase s, and our higher self as self with an uppercase S. Now think about this. If you have your ego at one side or a lowercase self on one side and your higher self on the other side, or the higher self with the uppercase S, the journey is the way to get from the ego to the higher self. The chasm that lies in between is the journey that we have to get on. But let's first understand, what is the ego? What is this lower self? The ego is that identity center that runs our lives in the here and the now, which is our material dimension, this 3-dimensional world that we live in. When we say things like, I want, I need, or I am, the I we're talking about is the ego. I was reading this book by Pressfield, The War of Art. I read it, I think 6 years ago, and I just read it recently, and the whole perspective of the book changed for me in these years. I don't think I understood the real meaning behind the book before. And Pressfield talks about when we say I love, we're not talking about the ego. And of course, he's talking in terms of creativity, writing or making music or any creative endeavors that you may have. And we go into our creative endeavors not because we want or we need, because we love. I personally love writing. And when I write, it is like my higher self comes online and she's the one who is in charge. I am just a conduit for the divine inspiration that's flowing through me. And the higher self is so incredibly happy, elated, excited that I get to do this, that she gets to do this. So when we say I love, we're talking about the higher self. But when we say things like I want and I need and I am, that's the ego. The ego really runs the show in the real world. It's the boss, and it has an enormous stake in remaining the boss. I also look at it as the guard at the gate to the self. So the guard that stands right at the beginning of the journey is the ego. Now let's also talk about the self a little bit. The self is the I that is beyond the ego. It's a deeper I. It's a greater I. It's the self, according to Carl Jung, contains infinitely more than the ego. Dreams come from the self. Instinct comes from the self. Intuition comes from the self. Our highest potential comes from the self. Creativity comes from the self. Love comes from the self. Authenticity comes from the self. And these courageous beings who are brave enough to want to get past the ego to those uninhabited rooms of the self begin to notice the subtle truths of their inner and outer world. I see Journey Home to Self as an infinity symbol. Some of you might have seen my Instagram. I talk about it on there sometimes. And as a side note, I also talk about the entire framework contained in the infinity symbol in episodes 11 and 12. So if you're interested, go back, listen to them. They're slightly longer episodes, but they're recorded as a masterclass to familiarize, I can't say my word today, that what it does look like to go from the ego to self. As a side note, I am also practicing creating this episode off the cuff and not being so anal, if I may use that word, about how I pronounce a word and how perfect I am on the podcast episode. So you may hear me repeat a word a couple of times if I've said it wrong. Correct me again. And I really feel like that's me. I in the past season and even in my past self, I have tried to be as much of a perfectionist as I could be. And I want to have fun now. And having fun means that I may make a mistake sometimes. I may mispronounce a word sometime, and that's okay. So you may hear me repeat a word a couple of times, and I'm not going to edit it. I'm just going to let it be there. That's my new self. All right, so imagine an infinity symbol for now, okay? It's number 8, quite simply, lying on its side. And imagine putting your finger right at the center. So if you can imagine an infinity symbol or number 8 lying on its side, imagine that you're right at the center of it. This, I call it the 0 point. It's where we stand before we go on the journey home to self. It's the starting point. Now, the other side of the 0 point is the unknown. And that's freaking scary, right? Ego will do anything to prevent us from going any further. It will keep us at the 0 point for as long as it takes. Some people hang out here for their entire life. But here's what you need to know about this 0 point. You have an ally. You have an ally that can take you into the other side on the journey to self. And that ally is your soul. The soul is very different from the ego. The soul has no interest in pleasing anyone or taking approval. Therefore, it's very unafraid. It is unafraid to do the impossible. It is unafraid to go against the grain to those paths that has not been disturbed by others' footsteps. There is no fear in it to dive deep into the underbelly of the unknown. In fact, there is an excitement. There's a madness in its eyes. It has a childlike curiosity and the fearlessness of a toddler who has just discovered that she has legs. The soul does not concern herself with things like success, failure, fame, reputation, making mistakes. These are the things ego is worried about. And what others think of the body that the soul is occupying is also none of its business. That is something that ego is concerned with. How do I sound like? How do I look like? What do other people think of me? That is ego's line of business. But the soul has no interest in knowing about what other people think of it. It has no interest in reputation. It doesn't care about reputation. It's almost ravenous. It's hungry for only one thing, and that is having an adventure. And I see it wanting to strip down naked, howl at the moon, laugh like a maniac, run down to that new unexplored path we call the unknown. Now, those of us who still haven't been touched by this electricity of the soul, this like manic energy of the soul, we see her as a mad woman. We see her as a manic. But our soul knows the truth. She knows that she is finally alive. And have you ever been at a party where your favorite song comes on and you suddenly, like something overcomes you? You're no longer thinking about how do you dance? Do you even know how to dance? And you just go on the dance floor and you start dancing. You don't care about what people are saying or looking at you or not looking at you. You don't care about anything. It's your favorite song. It probably reminds you of a love affair you had, your first love affair. It probably reminds you of a beautiful time, of an exciting time you had in your life, or you probably just love the song. And you can feel an electric charge in your body. It's like your every cell is jiggling with excitement. And your heart is beating in coherence with all your senses, right? And it's like your senses bloom open. It's like you can listen to the song so clearly. You know how it's like every pore of your body just blooms open like a red rose. That's how the soul feels, because now she's begun her adventure. Soul's only agenda is to journey back to source. Now, source is universe, God, whatever you call it, the higher power. Its agenda is to journey back to that point of oneness, telling it of all the adventures it has had on the way. And it cannot have those adventures if it is being restricted by the ego. And Source has actually waited for this. It has planned the entire cosmos just for this part so that Source can experience itself in us. It can experience what it feels like to dance, to write, to make love, to make art, to scream at the top of your lungs, to run down naked at the beach. It wants to know what it feels like to have these adventures. And so the source waits patiently till the self wakes up from the deep, long slumber. And it literally says, nope, no more. I am going on this adventure, and wow, we gotta clean up this house as we go along. So the entire infinity symbol, I see it as the cleaning up and then gaining mastery. So imagine the infinity symbol again. Imagine your finger on that 0 point. The gate opens up. The source is calling to us. The self wants to merge with your soul, and the soul goes on this adventure. And it goes from the right side. It takes almost like on a Ferris wheel. It goes on this roundabout way, but it has to do a lot of shedding. And I call it the initiation. You have to go through the initiation so that you can shed the masks that you've been wearing. You can shed all the voices that you've heard in your life, that you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're unworthy. Shame, guilt, all the patriarchal narratives that we have believed in, all the beliefs, all the things that we have known to believe that we are it, other than anything as our higher self. All that has to die down. All that has to fall off our bodies, our soul, before we can merge with the source, before we can merge with our higher self. And this kind of thinking that, well, we gotta go on this adventure and we gotta stop believing in all these false beliefs that we've believed so far. I gotta stop believing that I'm a victim. I gotta stop believing that I am not worthy and I don't deserve happiness and I don't deserve good health and I don't deserve money. I gotta stop believing that I'm not good enough, I'm not beautiful enough, I'm not talented enough. I gotta stop participating in all those voices. That thought is extremely dangerous to the ego. It has run a tight ship so far with old habits, beliefs, attitudes that have been established quite honestly for years and years. And the ego won't have it. It won't have this mutiny. After all, an adventure into the unknown is the very thing that jeopardizes its existence. It takes the position of being the boss away from it. It fires it from that position. And the existence of the ego relies on the fact that no part of its being will ever venture into anything that's unknown without an itinerary, an escape plan, or control. That's very dangerous to the ego. So it freaks out. But the soul's existence is in this naked dance into the unknown. It'll do anything and everything in its power to break through the monotony of life and hurl into the darkness with senseless abandon. The ego, on the other hand, will do everything in its power to hold the soul, will tether to its habits. It'll freak out. It'll put limits on your potential, your sense of joy, your peace. It creates a mirage that depicts that the only safe place is in the confines of our identity, of the known reality of our three-dimensional world. It is within our identity, the name, gender, title, net worth, where do you live, what do you do, so on and so forth. And it wants to keep the door to the unknown locked and bolted. In my opinion, there are two things that can open this door. Number one is curiosity, and number two is crisis. Curiosity often comes in, first, I would say, in passing thoughts. As you're walking your dog, you're staring into traffic at a red light, you're taking a bath or a shower. And these are questions, but if I look back, I think they're really SOS signals from the soul. And these are questions like, is there more to my life than this? Is this it? Like, I'm in my 40s now, and I've accumulated the wealth that I wanted to accumulate. I'm married, I have kids, I have a house. Is this it? Is there more to life? And maybe a profound question like, who am I? Who am I really? Am I Deepshikha? Am I more than Deepshikha? Am I a mom? Am I more than that? These profound questions. And feelings too. Don't disregard the feelings. Feelings are actually a really important indicator of what's going on in your psyche. If I have to define the feeling that led me to the 0 point, it was like a glass of sparkling water that had been left on the counter overnight. It's stale, it's warm, it tastes like piss. One of my friends, I was having a conversation with him once, and he described it as a day-old slice of pizza. And as I said, well, I don't feel it bad. Like, there's nothing bad, but there's nothing good either. Like, it's almost that 0 point, right? There's nothing good happening, nothing bad happening. And most people I've heard say, I don't know what it is, but definitely something is missing from my life. And when these questions, thoughts or feelings get buried under our long to-do lists, and in our effort to amass more of the things that the ego wants, more money, fame, success, more identity, or in our habits that it has established, like Netflix binges, shopping binges, drugs, alcohol, you can be sure that crisis will blast that door open. Once that curiosity bubbles up in the psyche, it's almost the soul cannot resist it. The soul will then do anything to open that door, even a crisis. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing. But my question is, why wait for crisis? Or why wait for the crisis? If I look back on my life in the past 3-4 years, I can definitely see a few smaller crises that could have made me think, oh wow, I'm looking at this whole equation of life wrong. Let me see what's happening here. Let me go into the unknown. Let me start getting answers from inside of myself rather than hiring coaches and mentors and business coaches and strategists and I don't know whatnot, right? Rather than getting answers from the outside. Let me go within. I also know that sometimes we do have to go through the eye of the needle. We have to go through the storm. We just have to. And if you're there, I can tell you two things. If you are in the crisis, accept it and surrender to it. Accept that this crisis is here and surrender to the crisis. And maybe you cannot even fathom what the other side of this will look like. Maybe you cannot even think that, oh, the other side will be so much richer than this is. It'll be a new and upgraded version of myself. And I know the feeling. I've been there, but I promise you it will be. This new level of awareness that you will have about yourself, it transcends the ego. It is where true authenticity lies. It's where you have deeper access to your intuition, to that intelligence, that divine intelligence that runs through you. And perhaps I am not even that great at putting it into words, but it is that knowing. It is that absolute freaking no doubt knowing of who you are. And only you can answer that for yourself. I can't tell you who you are. I can only know for myself who I am and perhaps say that in words. But that knowing who you are and who you're not, that is the most freeing thought. That you're not your identity, you're not your title, you're not the money in the bank, and you're not the labels that other people have given to you, and you're not the habits and the beliefs that have been occupying your mind for years and years, but you're something else, you're something other than that. That is a very freeing thought. That is when your true self rises. So here's what I leave you with today. Curiosity is your walking stick on this journey till you grow your wings. Get curious. Ask yourself, I wonder what's here for me. If you are in the unknown or the crisis, what lesson does this crisis have for me? I'm curious, what could be on the other side of it? I know that when we ask questions like that, the self answers back. You know that idiom, curiosity killed the cat? That's not the full quote. The full quote says, curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. And I don't know, maybe whoever wrote this meant to say that in order for the cat to be reborn as a new cat, as a new version of the cat, it had to die first. AKA the attachment to all that ego considers important, holds important, has to die, and then you come back literally as your higher self. I cannot wait to hear where does your curiosity take you on the journey home to self. And I cannot wait to travel on this journey along with you. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this conversation, I'd be so grateful if you could subscribe to our podcast and give us a 5-star review. And if you'd like to go deeper into the content that we share here on the podcast, check out our publication/community on Substack, also by the name of Journey Home to Self. That's where I share newsletter type articles every week on how to discover the true selves within us. Check it out, subscribe to it. You will find the link from the show notes. Thank you so much. Again, we appreciate you for listening, for coming back to this podcast so much. I'll see you next week.